Welcome back, guys. Chris here, and in this video I want to talk about printed forms in NetSuite. When we talk about printed forms, we are referring to a category, and there's really two components of it, but we're talking about instances where you have some kind of a transactional record that you either want to print out or you want to email it to customers, vendors, etc. So some pretty common examples of uses for printed forms would be sales orders, purchase orders, quotes, invoices, checks, pick tickets. You can also have things like vendor payment remittances, a lot of different usage for printed forms, whether actually printing or emailing them out. So in this video, I want to really dive into this subject. And before we actually go into how to utilize this in the system, I first want to just give a visual comparison of the two different ways that you can have printed forms in NetSuite, which is having what's called basic forms, and then you can have advanced PDFs. So we're going to go to a graphic right now. So this is a good example of a basic form, and you can see it's simple. It's not flashy. It's not like there's some amazing design or aesthetic appeal to it. It's the original avenue or route that you had for dealing with PDFs in the NetSuite system. So it's limited in terms of how much you can customize it, in terms of, certainly from a visual standpoint, it's very limited in terms of the ability to make these things look nice. And at this day and age, I would argue that there's very limited reasons and uses for going with a basic form, because they're not that simple to use. I'm going to show you how you can navigate around and do a little bit of customization when it comes to basic forms. And some people would argue that, well, advanced forms require the knowledge of HTML, and so if you don't know how to use that, you might want to stick with basic forms. But as you're going to see in the video, that's actually a limited explanation. There's actually, even if you don't know how to use HTML, you're going to be quite limited in your ability to work with a basic form. So there are a couple uses, I would say, where basic forms can be helpful, and that's things where visually you do not care what they look like and you're only going to be printing them off. So that's things like checks and pick tickets. Those are common examples where I would say using something like a basic form is actually not that bad and relatively easy to set up, so you might still use that. In every other instance, I would generally recommend you go with advanced PDFs. So I'll show an example of that now. And again, there's many different ways you can customize and you can make these things. So I'm giving maybe a bit more of an extreme example of a very nice looking advanced PDF with quite a few different customizations and aesthetic elements added into it, so you get a concept of what you can do with these things. Now, you'll often see when you're looking in the system, and you're going to see in a second, it's often listed as advanced PDF / HTML. And the reason they describe it that way is because the kind of basic concept of it is that you're using HTML to create this advanced PDF. Now, the reality of it is that you're actually not using HTML. You're using something called FreeMarker, which is just, it's got similarities to HTML in many ways. It'll look like HTML, but it's not exactly HTML. You basically use FreeMarker to build out your advanced PDF, which I am going to be talking about a lot more in a separate video just on advanced PDFs. But when it comes to FreeMarker, you fill in the information, and then FreeMarker will convert that to HTML so that the system can display and populate all the various information. So that should give you an overview concept of printed forms, which is basic and advanced PDFs. Now let's actually dive into NetSuite and take a look at these things. All right, so here we are in NetSuite, and we're going to come up here to customization down to forms. And you probably notice right from the get-go, there's a lot of different forms here. So why is that? I've described printed forms as being basic and advanced PDF. So why do we see 6 different types of forms here? Well, the reason for that is because when we're talking about NetSuite, there are 2 uses of the word form. You can have forms like we've been talking about in this video for printing and emailing, and then you can have forms that are attached to records. And you're probably already familiar with this. It's a very basic concept in NetSuite where you have forms attached to things like transaction records, entity records. And just to make sure it's very clear what we're talking about, if we come to sales, let's open up an invoice. If we come to this invoice record, the first thing you know about any kind of record is the form. So you can see here, I've made this form particularly for the invoice because we're going to be doing a whole example with invoices. So this particular form here If you don't know what a forms are, in the rare case that you don't know what that means, it means it's going to format what we're looking at here with this record. So this is a form for, in this case, is invoices. So all of these fields get configured based on this form. If I had an invoice for retail customers and a different one for wholesalers, they might look entirely different. Different fields, different formatting, different capabilities. If I had, you can have different forms for customers, for items, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a core aspect of NetSuite. And you're gonna see as we walk through an example here, that the form that we're dealing with here, even though these are two different kind of definitions of forms, one is tied to records, one is tied to, you want a kind of like a template that you're going to be printing or emailing, those two forms are tied at the hip. And you're going to see those are very, very inseparable when you're dealing with these things. So for now, you can understand why are there so many forms that we're dealing with. If we come back down here to customization and forms, so entry forms, that's the kind of forms if we're dealing with customer records, employees, items, etc. Transaction forms are what we're seeing here on this page. That's be for invoices, purchase orders, sales orders, whatever. And then you get to these three. So advanced PDF, right? If you printed forms, you got advanced. That's the forms you're going to deal with there. And then when you get down to basic forms, you actually have two different options. You can see here, transaction form PDF layout, and that's for printing. And then you have a transaction form HTML layout. That's for emailing. When you're dealing with advanced PDF, you just make one form, and that can be used for both printing or emailing. But when it comes to basic forms, you have one for printing, one for emailing. Historically, the reason for that was because they originally had the printed forms, and then with the advent of the internet and email capabilities, they realized that they need to make a different format and capability for emailing these forms. And so instead of just enhancing the functionality of their forms that could print to add the capability of emailing, they decided to make an entirely different type of form. Obviously, in hindsight, that was kind of a silly decision. But so let's actually open up both of these just so we can get a little bit better of a concept of what we're talking about. If I come to custom PDF layout, so this is for basic forms meant for printing. And here we have a long list of kind of templates for this. You can see the type here. So if we wanted to make printed forms for checks, we can see that here. If we come down here, we have transactions. So I'm going to walk you through an example for invoices. So under transaction, we're going to come down here to standard transaction layout. So that's the kind of the base template that we're going to build off of. So I'm actually going to come up here on the name of it, and I'm going to call it test, and then I'm going to say invoice. Okay. So we've got this, and if I scroll down here, we've got some basic features at the top here, like what kind of page size are you using? There's some very limited color customization functionality. But really when you come down here, this is when you're actually getting into the meat of the actual form and how you're going to customize this thing. So you can see it listed out right here. And this is for the printed form. So now let's take a quick look at the HTML form. Similarly, we get a page to say, okay, which template do you want to go with? If we wanted to do a invoice one, we would come down here to transaction. You've got classic and standard. Let's choose standard. And you can see here, this looks very different, right? We have what is HTML here. So this would be for emailing. If we'd have to create a separate form for emailing. And this, I'm just showing this so that I can explain that, as you can see here, this is HTML. If you already know how to work with HTML, then you might as well go make an advanced PDF with FreeMarker, which again is very similar to HTML, and it will then convert to HTML. And it has infinitely more capabilities and better use, and it's easier to work with. So if you already know how to do this, then don't do, there's just no reason to come to this page and work with this tool. As I said at the beginning of this video, there are still reasons why you might want to use basic forms for printing. That might be for pick tickets, that might be for checks. You can still have some use cases for that, especially if you don't know how to use HTML. But there's just no conceivable reason why you would want to use this. So I'm not even going to talk about it. I'm just going to leave it at that and say, don't deal with it. If you know how to deal with this, do advanced PDFs. And as I said before, I will have another video where I dive into the advanced PDF version of things and how to utilize that tool. But for now, we're just talking about printed forms and the basic form for printing in this case. So we've got the kind of preview of what we're looking at here. And you can see we've got all these various fields. Arguably, the most important aspect of this is right here in the column section. This is going to be the meat of the form, where you're going to see things like all the items this customer has listed, descriptions for them, the quantity, amount. So this is an important section. But as you can see here, we don't have any capability to define what columns are going to go here. We just have a giant white empty box. You can see there's features on the side. They do not give the capability to add those columns. So how do you do that? It brings in the second element that you need to deal with, which is, again, two different definitions of form. One is the printed forms that we're talking about, but if you want to influence those, you have to then tie it into the forms that are relevant to the transaction. So you can see here for this invoice record, we have this test invoice form, and this is what we need to influence. So I'm not actually going to do it on this is a new invoice, so there's no information filled in. I don't want to fill in the customer and a bunch of line item fields. So I'm actually going to come over here to list, and I'm going to find an existing invoice that I can just easily print, and we can start customizing that one. So the first invoice we have here, this should be fine. And it brings us to this invoice. So we already have, this is an existing invoice. So it already has the customer, the items, all that. And we can see this is using the same form, which is this test invoice form. So we have that here. Now what we need to do, if we want to come in here to our basic form and we want to start customizing all the columns that we can have here and how this thing looks, we need to customize this form to match in with our basic form. And the way that we do that is if it's selected here, we come up here to customize, we come down here to form. I want to open that up as a separate field because there's some important things I want to do on this particular one. So I open up this custom transaction form. You can see that here, test invoice. And first thing I want to explain, this is an important aspect of this. This is really where we're getting into the customization element of NetSuite. If you've never dealt with that before, that's totally fine. It can get pretty deep and complicated, and we don't need to get that complicated for the sake of this printed forms video. But I have an administrator's course where I dive into all the different elements related to customization. So if you have interest in that, you can go to that course. For now, the first thing I want to show relevant to printed forms is on any form that you're dealing with, the first thing you see here is printed type. And this is where you have that fork in the road where you decide, with this invoice, do I want it, when it's printing or emailing, do I want it to use an advanced PDF or basic form? I have that toggle selection here. So right now we have advanced selected. So we have, for printing, we have a whole series of options that we can select from. These are all templates. These are all advanced PDFs that we can utilize for printing. And no matter which one we choose, this is for printing, and then up here we have emailing. Now, in this case, this is NOAM, charges, etc. When it comes to advanced PDFs, every instance that I've ever seen with a client, you're just going to have them be the same because then one advanced PDF can be used for both. So if you've got NOAM for one, it's a little bit hard to tell. I guess it's this one. You would have it for both. If that's the one that you want to go with, you just select one for both. You could select something else, but there's just rarely a reason you would want to do that. And in this particular case, in other video, I'll talk more about advanced PDF. In this one, we're just talking about basic. So if we select basic, notice what happens. If I toggle between them, you can see this is, again, the printed version. It's a different list because these are only basic forms that are available for printing. And notice if I scroll up and down on this list, it is a different list, obviously, than what I have here. Because as I said, when you get to basic, it splits. You have to make one version for print, one version for email. And again, there's just no reason that you would use a basic form for email. So let's completely disregard that. And let's just focus on this PDF layout here. So right here, we've got this long list. Now, what we don't have on this list is the template that I have right here, because I haven't actually saved this yet. I've made a test invoice, but I haven't saved it. So it doesn't actually exist in the system. So let's actually save this guy. It brings us back to the list because we've saved it, but it's simple. We can scroll down here. You can see I have it right down here at the bottom. Now notice all of these are just standard templates. So they say customize. The one that I've now made as a custom element is the only one that says edit. So I can click on this one, and we come back to where we were 5 seconds ago. So now this template exists in the system, and now I can come back here to my custom transaction form, right? My test invoice. If I refresh this page and I hit reload on that, now I'm gonna have the ability to select that basic form that I just saved. So I'm gonna come here, I'm gonna click basic, and now under the print option, I'm gonna come down here and I've got my test invoice layout. I select that, good to go. All right, so we're one step ahead. Now let's come down here. And when you've selected that, you have this option here, the tab printing fields. So we click on that, And this is where we're getting a layer deeper into this. So this is where I would say, again, basic forms are not necessarily simple. They're just basic, right? Just because the word advanced PDF sounds more complicated, in many ways, I would argue that it's actually, as long as you know how to deal with free marker or HTML, it's actually a much simpler tool to utilize. But we're talking about basic forms now. So we're under printing fields. And the first thing we can describe, we've got header, footer, body, and columns. So what are these and how are they influencing things? Let's come back here to our basic form. We've got header fields up here. We've got footer fields down here. We've got the column in the middle. And it's actually very hard to see, but you've got the, you can actually drag it out a little bit here. You can also see it written out here. As soon as we select it, if I switch selections, you'll see basically what I'm influencing on the left here. So under body fields, you can see body fields right here. So this is all header except for this one field, which is body fields, and then columns, footer. And if we come back here to this form, header, footer, body, columns. So this is where we're actually going to go in and we're going to influence the fields that we see on this form, because we can't do it here. We have to do it here. So for example, let's talk about columns. This column is just a giant white empty box. Now we want to see what are the columns we're going to have here and how do we format these things? Well, we're going to do it here and we're going to do it under the sublist columns. And if we scroll down, these are all the columns that we can have in that big white empty box. And right now under this middle column, you can see anything that's selected is what's actually going to display, or at least have the possibility of displaying if there is information relevant to display there. So in this particular case, we can see we have item, description, and amount selected. So before we go any further in this, let's actually pull up this invoice, not just a template and what we're influencing. Let's actually pull up what does this actual invoice look like. So in this particular case, we've got this under basic. Let's save this so that this form, this test invoice form, is actually tied now from a print version to this basic form. So we're going to save this guy. And then once this is done saving, we can come to this invoice, which remember, this is the invoice that we went to customize the form that it was tied to. We can come here to save and print. And if I click on that, it's going to load this page. This page is basically going to go to a white page. But also I have this new pop-up here, which is the printed form. So I'm actually going to back up on this white page. And so I come back to my actual invoice and now I can take a look at this printed form. So this is what we're actually dealing with. This is the final format for this particular invoice using this particular custom invoice form and this particular basic printed form. All of these things come together. This is what it's going to look like. So we've got our header fields up here. We've got our footer section down here. We've got our body fields here. And we've got our column section right in the middle. So again, we're focusing on column. So let's talk about this. We can see item, description, and amount. That's it, 3 columns. So let's come back to our custom form. We're going to come back down here to printing fields, back over to columns. And this is where we're going to see why we're seeing that on when we come here. Why are we seeing just these 3? We're seeing that because we have item selected, we have description selected, and we have amount selected. That's it. We have all these other options that we could include, but these are the only 3 that are selected. But I want to add, because we're going to make a new version of this, and I want to show you what that new version looks like in contrast to what we already have. So let's add an additional column here. And a relevant one to add would be quantity, because we can see the amount, but we don't know, is it 1 quantity? Is it 50? What are we dealing with? So let's come over to quantity, which you can see right here, and let's select that. Okay, so we're going to add that column, but now we get into the formatting element of things. If we scroll back up here, we can see a new column on the right here, not new, but I'm describing it newly to you, called width. So width is going to influence, if we come back here to the final result, it's going to influence how much these things are taking up space. Now, if we want to dictate how big this entire box is going to be on the final form, we would do that here, where we can click on this thing and I can drag the parameters of my column section. I could make it really thin, I can make it longer, I can do whatever I want with it. That's how it influences the whole section. But when we're talking about each individual column in this box, that's where, just like here, how much space is items going to take, how much is description, how much is amount. If we want to look at that element of things, then we come to the custom form and we influence the width. So in this case, you can see we have 3, 5, and 1. We've got 3 columns, 3, 5, and 1. Now these are not inches. It's almost like a proportion system where it takes whatever you have selected. You could have 20 columns selected. For whatever columns you have selected and are going to be displayed, if you put a number for them, it's going to add up all those numbers and it's going to say, okay, if these numbers total 50, for any individual column, what percentage of the total does that take? So in this particular case, 3, 5, and 1, they add up to 9. So it's almost 10, which would be an easy number because it would be 100%. But in this case, 9 is the total number. So 9 is your 100%. If you look over here, from this line here to this line here, this distance is 9, in other words, 100%. So now it becomes a proportion where item is 3 out of 9, which is 33%. It's 1/3 of this entire length. And this description section was 5. So it's 5 out of 9. It's that proportion of the entire distance. And then this is 1 out of 9. So good, we've got that. But now we want to add our additional columns. So if we come back over here, scroll down to the quantity column that I'm adding, I need to dictate what is going to be the width. And I don't want it to be very wide, so I'm going to add 1. So now by adding 1, now the total number has gone up to 10. So now the math on that becomes much easier. If I go to my printed form, now item is going to take up 30% of the total width. Description is going to take up 50%. Amount's going to take up 10%. And then quantity is going to take up 10%. Simple. So we come back over here. We've got what we want. The last thing I want to describe here is the description. This is where, notice the label, these are editable fields. Let's say I don't actually sell items. So the invoice I'm going to send, it's actually services that I'm providing. So I wanted the customer to see the column labeled services. But at the same time, if I just made this jargon where I go ABC, you can write that in there. And then if you come back to it, you go, what is ABC? What is that even? You can look over here in the description and go, oh, I get it. Someone just put in a bogus title. This is actually the item field. That's what we're influencing here. So you can put in services and you would know, okay, good. What are we dealing with? You got a reference point here on the right. All right, so we've listed this out. We've got what we want. Now I'm going to briefly talk about the other categories because we've only talked about columns up until this point. So we can come over to header. You can see things like company name, logo, date, bill to. If we come back to our original invoice, you can see things like the name, you can see the bill to, the date, etc. If we come back to our field, let's go to body for a second. So this is where you can add in all these additional body fields. So if we go back to our custom form, you can see just this one section. I know it looks tiny, but it can actually extend out quite a bit. You can add a ton of additional body fields in there. They're not technically the header fields, which is all this other stuff, but you can add in whatever other body fields you want. So if we come over here, you can have things like the terms, the due date, the project that's tied to this, if there is one, start date, end date, etc. And again, if we come to our printed form, this is where we're seeing all our body fields, terms, due date, project, start, end, etc. Hopefully this is all making sense. This is all starting to tie together. And you probably have gotten the perspective at this point that while it is possible to customize this to a degree, it's very limited. All you can do is kind of just very kind of haphazardly move these boxes around here. You can drag and drop these boxes around as you so choose. And then you can influence the width of these things here and influence what fields are going to go in or what columns are going to be added. But other than that, I mean, you can also come in here and you can grab these things and shift them around. Like let's say you want a due date to be above terms. You can move these things around a bit, but if you compare that to an advanced PDF where you can get very intricate with exactly how it's going to be labeled, you can have different coloring, you can have headers that have darker font, and then you get down to the lower levels and it suddenly gets smaller width, or you put a little logo in at the column level. You can do whatever you want with advanced PDFs. When it comes to these basic forms, you're very, very limited in terms of kind of almost like a Lego block approach to how you build these forms out. And it's going to look about as aesthetic. So that is the basic concept. We've made some changes here. So let's actually save this and let's look at the final version of the form that we've just created to get a comparison of the influence and the changes that we just made. So with this, we're going to come up here back to save and edit. Now that that's saved, we come here to invoice. Just like we did before, we're gonna go to print again on this guy. And again, it's gonna take us to a blank white page, and we're just gonna jump backwards and we're gonna have that separate file. And now we can compare our two forms. This is our original invoice, and this is our new invoice. So you can see here, we've got just a back-to-back. You got little things like, notice due date and terms just swapped because I moved that thing one to the next. I added a new column called quantity, so we can see that here. If we look at our box, notice the width is identical. It might look like it's a little different, but it's just an optical illusion where we have different columns here now. So because we added in a new column, it actually had to crunch down the text font to be able to fit that in there. And you can see this is now 30% of the total width from here to here. And then we've got 50%, 10%, 10%. So that gives you a concept of how you would go about influencing these things. And if I come back here to my custom PDF layout, just to reiterate, if you click around, you can start to influence these things. If you wanted to add a new element, in addition to just the elements that you have already here, you can come up here and say add custom element. So you'd have the ability, let's say you want to come in, you want to add an element for account. You can click on that. Let's open this up a little bit just so we can see the save option. So we can click OK on that. And then we get a new box. So we could bring this in and we could add in new elements as we so choose. We could remove other ones. We could resize them. We could reconfigure them. You do have some flexibility to customize the layout of how this basic printed form is going to come out in the end. And then, as I mentioned, you got a few features up here. You can do some really basic color formatting, but it's very, very limited. So that is kind of a tutorial walkthrough on how you would make this printed basic form. I haven't talked about advanced PDFs almost at all in this video, so I don't want to leave it entirely out because I know it's something a lot of people are going to want to utilize. So I am going to come up here to customization, down to forms, just to show what you would even go to and what you would influence. We can come here to advanced PDF layout or template. We come here, very similar to the page we saw when we were dealing with basic forms, where we have all these basic templates. You can see customize on the left here. We can come in here. If we were dealing with transactions for invoice, we'd go to a transaction template. We would save and create a custom one. And we also have on the right here, notice we have a preferred column. So this is also where we can come in once we create a custom form that we like. And then we could come in here and we could say, we want that form to be preferred. So we want that to default as the option whenever we're dealing with the relevant type of, let's say it's a transaction form, etc. So once again, I will make a separate advanced PDF where I go way more into that, how you make them, how you utilize them, some tricks and trades relevant to advanced PDFs. But this video is long enough as it is, and I think we can spare that for the sake of this particular video. So that's it on printed forms as an overall concept, as well as a tutorial on basic forms specifically. I hope you found this video helpful. If so, please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. I've been making a video every single week on NetSuite for the last 2 years, and I will continue to do so for many more years to come. So if you want to have access to those, by all means, hit the subscribe button. And with all of that in mind, I hope to see you in the next video.